A biker secretly follows a single mom home. What he witnesses through her window is not what he expects. It's a secret so powerful, it unlocks a past he thought was lost forever and binds their futures together with a sacred, unbreakable vow. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. The rain was a cold, steady drumbeat on the roof of the Waffle Barrel. Inside, James, president of the Saints of Steel MC, sat in his usual corner booth, nursing a black coffee. He wasn't there for the food. He was there to watch the new waitress. Her name was Sarah. She moved with a quiet efficiency that was different from the other servers. No wasted motion. Her smile for customers was warm, but her eyes held a deep, tired sadness that never quite left. She had a 5-year-old son, Leo, who sometimes sat in a back booth with a coloring book during her late shifts. James had noticed her first because of that look in her eyes. It was a look he knew. It was the look of someone carrying a weight they couldn't put down. Tonight, her shift ended at midnight. James watched her count her tips, a meager pile of ones and change. She helped Leo into a thin jacket, then they walked out into the downpour. She didn't have a car. She started walking, holding an umbrella over Leo, heading towards the rougher part of town. Something tightened in James's chest. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a pull, a need to know. He threw cash on the table, pulled on his own leather jacket, and followed them on foot, keeping a distance. They walked for 20 minutes, finally turning into the courtyard of the Pine Ridge Apartments. It was a rundown low-income complex. Sarah led Leo to a door at the side of a building, a basement apartment. She unlocked it, and they disappeared inside. James stood in the shadow of a dripping tree. He shouldn't do this. It was wrong, but he had to see. He had to know what that sadness was. He moved quietly around the side of the building. There was a small, high window, half covered by a frayed curtain. A sliver of light spilled out. He peered inside. The room was a basement studio. One main room, a tiny kitchenette, a bathroom door stood ajar, and in the corner, a desk. Sarah was at the desk. She had changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt. Leo was already asleep in a bunk bed crammed into an alcove so small it was like a closet. Textbooks were stacked high on the desk. Anatomy and physiology, fundamentals of nursing. She opened one, and then James saw her pull out a small, powerful flashlight. She clicked it on, angling the beam at the book. She wasn't turning on the main light. To save money, he realized, to keep the electric bill down. His throat closed. He watched her study, her finger tracing lines on the page, her lips moving silently. She was fighting for something in that little circle of light. Then she stopped. She put down her pen. She reached under the desk and pulled out a small wooden box. She opened it with careful reverence. Even from the window, James could see the glint of metal. She lifted it out, a medal on a ribbon. She held it to her lips, kissed it softly, then stood. She walked to the bunk bed and placed the medal carefully on the pillow next to her sleeping son's head. She smoothed his hair. Then she looked at a small framed photo on the desk. James couldn't see the face. Sarah spoke, her voice a whisper he could barely hear through the glass. "I'm keeping my promise, David. I'm getting us out. I'm going to be a nurse, just like we said. Watch over him." She touched the photo gently, then went back to her books, back into her circle of light. James stood frozen in the rain. He knew that medal. He knew the shape of it, the color of the ribbon, a purple heart. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. David, a common name, it couldn't be. He needed to see that photo. He moved without thinking, around to the front of the basement door. He raised his hand to knock, then stopped. What would he say? "Hi, I'm the biker from the diner. I was spying through your window." He couldn't, not like this. He turned and walked away, his mind reeling. The rain soaked through his jacket, but he didn't feel it. All he felt was a cold dread and a rising, desperate hope. The next day, he was back at the diner at noon. Sarah was working the lunch shift. He sat in her section. "Coffee, please," he said, his voice rough. She brought it. "Anything to eat today?" "Just coffee," he paused. "My name's James." She gave a polite, tired smile. "Sarah. Long shift last night," he said, trying to sound casual. Saw you walking home in the rain, tough with a kid. Her smile vanished, replaced by wariness. We manage. I'm sure you do. He took a breath. This was it. Your husband, is he deployed? Her face went pale, then shut down completely. A wall slammed up. That's not your business. She turned to walk away. David, James said softly. She froze. Slowly she turned back, her eyes wide with shock and fear. I knew a David, James said, his voice low so only she could hear. A good man, a brave man, he saved my life. In Afghanistan, he didn't make it home. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes instantly, but she fought them back, glancing around the busy diner. I have a photo, James said, pulling out his wallet. It was an old, worn picture of his unit. He pointed to the man standing next to him, grinning, arms slung over James's shoulders. David Miller. Sarah stared at the photo. A sob escaped her. She nodded, just once, unable to speak. James felt the world tilt. It was him, his David, his brother who had shoved him into a ditch a second before the RPG hit, taking the full blast himself. James had carried his body out, had made a promise to find his family, to tell them he died a hero. But he'd been discharged with his own injuries, physical and mental, and had lost his way. The club had become his family, his purpose. He'd searched, but records were messy, and Sarah had moved, changed her name back after David's death. And all this time, she was here, struggling, keeping her promise while he had failed his. Your shift ends at 4, James said, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't control. Please, let me buy you and Leo a proper dinner. Let me tell you about him, about how he saved me. Sarah looked at him, at the tough biker with tears now openly streaming down his own face, mixing with the rain from the night before still dried on his jacket. She saw the truth in his agony. She nodded. That evening, at a quiet family restaurant, Leo ate chicken nuggets with wide eyes, amazed by the size of the meal. Sarah listened as James told stories, funny stories about David's terrible jokes, brave stories about his leadership, the hard story about his final act of sacrifice. I promised him I'd find you, James finished, his voice breaking. I failed. For years I failed you. You found us now, Sarah whispered, holding Leo close. That's what matters. After that, James's mission was absolute. He didn't ask permission. He acted. The Saints of Steel were his brothers, and when he called a church meeting and told them the story of the hero, his family, their struggle, the vote was unanimous. Sarah and Leo were under their protection. The life debt wasn't just a club law this time, it was a sacred oath to a fallen brother. The next day, a moving truck showed up at Pine Ridge. Paul, James's enforcer, personally packed their few belongings. They moved into a safe, clean townhouse owned by the club's holding company. The rent was $1 a year. James had the basement soundproofed and turned into a proper study for Sarah, with a real desk and a good lamp. Sarah's beat-up car was replaced with a reliable SUV. Club vehicle, James said, leaving no room for argument. When she tried to refuse, he looked her in the eye. David gave me my life. Let me help you live yours for him. The chemistry between them was immediate and profound, built on a foundation of shared grief and unwavering loyalty. It was in the way he'd bring her coffee exactly how she liked it when she was studying late. It was in the way she'd calm the storm in his eyes after a difficult club meeting with a single, gentle touch on his arm. It was charged, but respectful, full of the ghost of the man they both loved. James used the club's resources. He called in a favor from a doctor who owed the Saints. Sarah got a paid internship at the hospital, her textbooks and tuition covered by a scholarship from the club's charity fund. Leo was enrolled in a good preschool, his after-school care handled by the club's women. Sarah flourished. The weight began to lift from her shoulders. She smiled more, a real smile that reached her eyes. Leo blossomed, gaining confidence, telling everyone his Uncle James rode a motorcycle. One night, Sarah finished her final exam. She came out of her study to find James on the couch, reading to Leo. The sight stole her breath. The big, tattooed biker, his voice soft as he did the voices in a picture book. After Leo was asleep, she sat next to him, "I passed," she said. "I'm going to be a nurse." James pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "He'd be so proud of you," he murmured into her hair. She looked up at him, her eyes full of tears and something else, something like a future. "We are proud of you, James." He kissed her then. It was a kiss of healing, of promise, of a love that had been born in a battlefield and had found its way home in a diner, in a basement window, in the light of a flashlight on a nursing textbook. The Saints of Steel didn't give up their empire. They expanded it to include a piece of David Miller's dream. And James, the hardened president, finally kept his promise, not just by finding David's family, but by giving them the life his brother had died to protect. Sarah's new life was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, a stark contrast to the silent, desperate struggle of before. Her days were a patchwork of hospital shifts for her internship, study sessions, and being a mom. But now the edges were softened. Leo was happy and safe at the club-affiliated daycare. Groceries appeared in the fridge. Her car never had less than half a tank of gas. The support was invisible but absolute, like the foundations of a well-built house. At the hospital, she thrived. Her natural compassion, sharpened by her own hardships, made her a favorite with patients and a quick study for the senior nurses. But not everyone was welcoming. A charge nurse named Brenda viewed the new intern with the mysterious scholarship and the sudden connections with suspicion. Brenda was old school, believing you had to suffer to earn your place. One afternoon, Brenda cornered Sarah in a supply closet. "I know about your sponsors," she hissed, her voice low. "The Saints of Steel. This is a hospital, not a biker bar. We have ethics. If I find out you're getting special treatment because you're some gangster's charity case, I'll have you removed." Sarah's old fear, the fear of being exposed, of having her fragile stability ripped away, flared hot for a second. Then she thought of David's medal, of James's steady presence, of her own long nights of study by flashlight. She straightened her shoulders. "My treatment is based on my work, Nurse Brenda," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "You can check my test scores. You can ask my patients. My personal life is just that, personal. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Jenkins in 304 needs his vitals checked." She walked out, leaving Brenda sputtering. Sarah's heart was pounding, but it felt good. She had stood her ground. She told James about it that night, over dinner. Leo was playing with trucks at their feet in the townhouse's small living room. James's face darkened. "I can have a word with her." "No," Sarah said quickly, putting a hand over his. "That's exactly what she expects, that I need muscle, I need to do this myself. I just needed to tell you." James looked at their joined hands, then at her determined face. He saw David's stubborn pride in her eyes. He nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but if she crosses a line." "You'll be the first to know," she promised, a small smile touching her lips. The chemistry between them was a constant, warm undercurrent. It was in the easy way they moved around each other in the kitchen, in the way he'd massage her shoulders after a long shift, his strong hands gentle on her knots of tension, in the charged silence that would sometimes fall between them, full of things unsaid but deeply felt. One night, helping her review flashcards, their fingers brushed. A spark seemed to jump between them, and their eyes locked. The air grew thick. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their second kiss was not about grief, but about a fierce, growing need. It was interrupted by Leo's sleepy cry from his room, but the promise of it hung in the air afterwards, sweet and inevitable. The threat, when it came, was not from a jealous nurse, but from the past, David's past. David had a younger brother, Kyle. Kyle was nothing like David. He was bitter, entitled, and had a gambling problem. He'd heard through the ragged remains of family gossip that Sarah was doing well, connected to some motorcycle club. He saw a payday. He showed up at the townhouse on a Sunday afternoon. James was at the clubhouse. Sarah opened the door, and her blood ran cold. "Sarah, long time," Kyle said, his smile slick. "Heard you landed on your feet. Really great, with my brother's death benefits and all." "The benefits were modest, Kyle, and you know that," Sarah said, blocking the doorway. Sure, but now with your new friends." He peered past her into the tidy home. "A guy like me, I have debts. Family should help family. I think David would want you to help me." "David would want you to get a job," Sarah said, her voice icy. "Please leave." "Or what, you'll call your biker boyfriends?" Kyle sneered. "I'll tell them how you're taking advantage of my poor dead brother's memory to live it up. I'll make noise. The kind of noise that gets kids looked at by social services." Fear, cold and sharp, stabbed through Sarah. He was playing the worst possible card. Just then, a truck pulled up. Paul, who had been assigned as their rotating neighborhood watch, got out. He didn't say a word. He just leaned against the truck, crossed his massive arms, and stared at Kyle. Kyle's bravado shrank. "This isn't over," he muttered, and slunk back to his car. When James came home, Sarah was shaking. She told him everything. James's anger was cold and precise. This was a different kind of enemy. This was David's blood. He didn't send Paul. He went himself with Jessica, their lawyer. They found Kyle at a rundown betting parlor. "Kyle Miller," James said, his voice flat. Kyle tried to bluster. "You can't intimidate me." "I'm not here to intimidate," James said. "I'm here to offer a deal, Jessica." Jessica stepped forward, all business. "Mr. Miller, we are prepared to pay off your current gambling debts, which total $8,450. In return, you will sign this document severing any financial or legal claim you might attempt to make on Sarah or Leo Miller's assets, present or future. You will also agree to a restraining order, staying 500 feet away from them. If you violate this, not only will the debt collection resume with considerable interest from our associates, but we will also press charges for attempted extortion, for which we have a witness." She nodded to Paul, who was recording the conversation on his phone. Kyle was trapped. He took the deal. The debts were paid from the club's charity fund. Kyle signed the papers and left town. That night, Sarah broke down in James's arms. "I'm so tired of being afraid, of people trying to take him from me or take what little we have." James held her tight. "They can't, not anymore. You have an army behind you now, his army." He meant David's, and he meant the Saints. The final hurdle was Sarah's nursing board exam. The night before, she was a bundle of nerves. James canceled a club meeting to be with her. He cooked dinner, a simple pasta that he somehow managed to burn slightly. Leo giggled and called it dinosaur noodles. The normal, silly moment broke her tension. Later, James brought out a small box. "Before you go in there tomorrow," he said. Inside was a new high-quality stethoscope. Engraved on the chest piece were the words, "For Sarah, keep the promise, D&J." Tears filled her eyes. David and James, her past and her present, both believing in her. "I love you, James," she whispered. It was the first time she'd said it. He cupped her face, his own eyes bright. "I love you, Sarah, so much." She passed her boards with flying colors. The celebration at the clubhouse was epic. Even Brenda from the hospital heard. The news of Sarah's top score shut down her last shred of criticism. Sarah was offered a full-time position in the ER. At the party, James stood with Leo on his shoulders. He raised a beer. "To Sarah, a fighter, a healer, our family." The club roared. Sarah looked around at the sea of leather and smiles, at Paul pretending to let Leo arm wrestle him, at Jessica giving her a thumbs up. She looked at James, her rock. She was David's widow in their eyes. She was Sarah, one of them. She had kept her promise to David, and James had kept his. And somewhere in the middle, they had built a new promise, a new life together. The crisp white jacket of a registered nurse felt like armor to Sarah. It was a uniform of honor, earned in the trenches of her own life. Her first official shift in the emergency room was a baptism by fire, a multi-car accident, a heart attack, a child with a high fever. She moved through it all with the calm, efficient focus she'd honed during years of quiet desperation. Her colleagues saw a natural. Brenda, the skeptical charge nurse, was forced to give a begrudging nod of respect. At home, the townhouse was no longer just a refuge. It was a vibrant home. Leo's drawings of motorcycles, of hospitals, of a big man and a woman holding hands covered the fridge. The small study was now a real office, Sarah's nursing diploma hanging proudly next to a framed photo of David in his dress uniform. James had placed it there himself, a gesture of profound respect that meant more to Sarah than any words. James's life had also found a new center. The Saints of Steel still required his leadership. There were still runs, meetings, the complex navigation of their legitimate and less than legitimate interests, but his focus had irrevocably shifted. His most important meetings were now at the kitchen table, helping Leo sound out words or listening to Sarah recount her day, her eyes alight with the purpose she'd fought so hard for. The chemistry between them had settled into a deep, mature love. It was physical, the way he'd pull her onto his lap after a long day, nuzzling the sensitive spot behind her ear until she laughed, the way she'd trace the intricate tattoos on his back, learning the stories in the ink. But it was also emotional, a shared language of glances, a quiet solidarity, a united front in parenting Leo. One evening, as Sarah was studying for a trauma certification, James came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her head. "You know," he murmured, "I used to think strength was about how much you could carry alone. David taught me it was about carrying others. You're teaching me it's about building something that doesn't feel so heavy to carry at all." She turned in his arms and kissed him, a slow, sweet kiss that held the weight of their shared history and the lightness of their future. Leo was the thread that wove their worlds together seamlessly. At the clubhouse, he was a prince. Paul taught him how to check tire pressure. The club's old ladies, led by a fierce grandmother named Stella, doted on him, stuffing him with cookies and teaching him to knit, much to the amusement of the burly bikers. He called James Dad now without a second thought, but James made sure David's photo was a constant presence, telling Leo stories of his first father's bravery and kindness. James began taking Leo to the Veterans Cemetery on David's birthday and Memorial Day. They would clean the headstone, leave flowers, and James would tell Leo simple, honest stories. "Your dad loved you before he even met you," James said one crisp autumn day. "He talked about you all the time. He was the bravest man I knew because he was fighting for a future with you and your mom in it." Leo, now 6, would listen solemnly, then place a small toy motorcycle by the stone. For the ride home, he'd whisper, "The club." Inspired by Sarah's journey and James's obvious transformation, launched a new initiative, Saints Shield, Veterans Transition Program. Using the garage and their construction contacts, they offered free trade skills and job placement for struggling vets. Sarah served as the medical liaison, helping vets access healthcare and counseling. The program was a massive success, earning the club unexpected praise from the city council and local news. The empire was not just secure, it was gaining a reputation for civic good, its outlaw heart now beating in rhythm with the community. The first major test of this new equilibrium came from outside. A powerful developer, Covington Enterprises, wanted to buy up a whole block of old houses to build luxury condos. One of those houses belonged to Stella, the club's beloved elder. She refused to sell. Covington played dirty. They got the city to red tag her house for dubious code violations. They had her utilities mysteriously disrupted. They sent intimidating men to loiter outside. Stella, proud and stubborn, told James not to interfere. "I won't have you boys in trouble over my old bones." But Sarah saw the stress on Stella's face. She saw it as a medical professional, the elevated blood pressure, the anxiety. She went to James. "This isn't just about property. This is about a woman's health. They're terrorizing her. We can't fight this with wrenches. We fight it with what we have now." What they had was legitimacy. Sarah, Jessica, the lawyer, and James scheduled a meeting with the head of Covington Enterprises, a slick man named Mr. Armitage, at his downtown office. Armitage smiled condescendingly at the trio, the biker, the lawyer, and the nurse. "This is a simple property dispute. The city has found deficiencies. We are offering fair market value." Jessica slid a folder across the desk. "These are the medical records of Stella Kowalski, showing acute stress-induced hypertension directly correlated to the harassment conducted by your subcontractors, as witnessed and documented here." She tapped a second folder. "This is a draft lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress, elder abuse, and tortious interference. We will also be filing complaints with every licensing board for the inspectors involved, whom we have evidence of being wined and dined by your company." Sarah spoke next, her voice calm and professional. "As an ER nurse, Mr. Armitage, I can tell you what sustained stress does to an elderly heart. If Mrs. Kowalski has a cardiac event, this moves from civil to criminal negligence. We have the local news ready to run a story about a big developer bullying a war widow. How does that fit with your brand?" James finally spoke, leaning forward. He didn't snarl, he didn't threaten, he stated facts. "You're used to pushing people around who can't push back. You picked the wrong old lady. Walk away from her house. Fix the violations you caused, or we bury your project in legal fees and bad press until you wish you never heard of us." Armitage faced not with thugs, but with a formidable legal, medical, and public relations front folded. The red tags were lifted. Stella kept her home. The club had won a battle without throwing a single punch, using the very system that had once oppressed them. The victory party was at Stella's house. She hugged Sarah tightly. "You fierce thing, David would be so proud." Then she turned and pinched James's cheek. "And you finally learned to use your head for more than a helmet holder." Everyone laughed. In that moment, Sarah looked around at the gathered saints, their families, the vets from their program, the neighbors they'd helped. This was her family. This sprawling, loud, loyal, imperfect family. She caught James's eye across the yard, and the love she saw there was a solid, peaceful thing. A few months later, on a warm spring evening, James took Sarah and Leo to the lakefront park. As the sun set, painting the sky in oranges and purples, he got down on one knee, not in front of a crowd, but just for them. Leo grinned, clutching a small box he'd been hiding. "Sarah," James said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I made a promise to a brother to look after his family. I never dreamed that promise would lead me to you, to a love that feels like coming home. I don't want to just look after you anymore. I want to build a life with you. Officially, will you marry me?" He opened the box Leo handed him. Inside was a ring. The band was made from a melted-down shell casing, one James had saved from their deployment. Set in it was David's Purple Heart medal, resized and polished, its purple and gold gleaming in the twilight. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, tears instantly streaming. It was the most perfect, most profound symbol of their journey she could imagine. The past honored, integrated into the future. A sacrifice transformed into a promise. "Yes," she choked out, pulling both James and Leo into a tearful, laughing hug. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The wedding was a glorious fusion of their worlds. It was held in the Veterans Hall, decorated with both club colors and nursing symbols. Stella was Sarah's matron of honor. Paul was James's best man. Leo was the ring bearer, proudly carrying the rings on a miniature motorcycle helmet. David was present in every detail. His photo had a place of honor. The officiant told the story of his sacrifice and the love that grew from its shadow. As James and Sarah exchanged vows, they also made a vow to David's memory, to raise Leo with love, to live with purpose, and to honor his legacy every day. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the traditional club salute was joined by another sound, the clear, sharp clap of dozens of veterans from their Saints Shield program, standing at attention in their dress uniforms, giving a unified salute. The two roars of engines and of respect merged into one thunderous sound of unity. Life as a family settled into its beautiful, busy rhythm. Sarah excelled at the hospital, eventually becoming a charge nurse herself, mentoring others. James's leadership, tempered by love and responsibility, made the Saints stronger and more respected than ever. Their legitimate businesses boomed, funding more community programs. Leo grew a confident boy who knew he had two fathers, one a hero in heaven, one a hero on earth. He had his mother's compassion and a knack for mechanics he got from hanging around the garage. On his 8th birthday, James gave him a small, custom-built dirt bike. Paul taught him to ride in a safe, fenced field. The first time he took a tiny, wobbly lap by himself, Sarah cried, and James's chest swelled with a pride so fierce it hurt. One evening, years after that first night peering through a basement window, James came home to find Sarah in Leo's room, now a space covered in space posters and model cars. She was sitting on the edge of his bed. Holding the Purple Heart ring she now wore every day, Leo was asleep. James leaned in the doorway. "Everything okay?" She smiled, a serene, content smile. Just thinking about promises, I kept mine to David. I got us out, I became a nurse. She looked up at James, her eyes shining. And you kept your promise to him in a way I don't think either of you ever imagined. You didn't just find us, you gave us a family, a real, whole, wonderful family. He walked over and sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her. They looked at their sleeping son, at the peaceful room, at the life they had built from the ashes of loss. He saved my life, James said quietly, his gaze on Leo. But you too, you saved my soul. The Iron Saints never gave up their empire. They never softened their edge where it counted. But the heart of that empire was no longer Clubhouse. It was this house. It was a love story that began with a sacrifice on a dusty road overseas and found its happy ending in the quiet dedication of a waitress studying by flashlight and the unwavering loyalty of a biker who finally came home, not just to a place, but to a purpose and to a love that healed every broken thing in its path. Thank you for watching. Have you ever made a promise you thought you broken? Would you have the courage to follow a stranger into the dark? Subscribe and tell us what moved you most in the comments. Where in the world are you joining us from?